All right, welcome to a new episode of Opening Bid. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. This is the podcast I hope that will make you a smarter investor. In fact, I actually know it will make you a smarter investor. Before we get to our really feature interview for today, I have to hit our stock of the day. And it was a toss-up between McDonald's and its E. coli outbreak and then the surprising out of left field earnings warning and whiff from Starbucks. They were supposed to report about a week ago. I'm going with Starbucks as our stock of the day. Really some worrisome trends at this company. Most recent quarter, U.S. same-store sales down 6%. Comparable transactions at U.S. stores down 10%. I mean, these are shocking numbers for a company, an iconic American company like a Starbucks. Even worse than that, if you could believe it or not, China's same-store sales down 14%. Now, in addition to this, new Starbucks CEO Brian Niccol came out with a video on the website, about 6 minutes, saying the company just wants to get back to selling coffee. Brian just started in early September, so these results are on the back or because of the efforts from prior management. But I think this is the vibe on the street, at least right now. The problems at Starbucks are deeply rooted. It's just not the U.S. It's not about giving more promotions away. I think Brian's going to have to come in here and probably damn near cut the menu size more than 50%. Stop offering energy drinks, just sell coffee, make it good, and put seats back in stores. And then China, it's very likely that Starbucks will figure out or opt to franchise its model in China via some strategic deal. But again, the challenges at Starbucks are very real, they're very deep, and they may continue for the next few quarters until Brian Niccol and his team get to working on their magic. All right, having said that, let's get to our feature interview today. I've been looking forward to this one for some time. Anne Chow, former AT&T business CEO, and good to see you. AT&T is a company that I've followed for some time, and you spent, 32 years there? So it's good to welcome you on to Yahoo Finance. Just given your expertise in leadership, I really spent the night thinking about a conversation the Yahoo Finance team had with Mark Cuban on the leadership front. Of course, he was talking about the election, but I'm interested from your vantage point. What do you make of leadership in America? I mean, we have two wildly different candidates, but in terms of leadership in America, what's your view on it?
Yeah, well, Brian, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for having this conversation about leadership. As we take a step back and think about what leadership actually is, leadership is all about motivating, inspiring, and getting a group of people aligned to execute against a common objective and goal. And, while you brought up politics, the reality is that leadership is a choice. It has no title, it has no position, it has no politics, it has no religion. Leadership is a characteristic, it is a privilege, it is a responsibility. My take on leadership in America today, as leadership across the world, quite frankly, is that it is absolutely desperately needed in a way that brings us together as a society. When we reflect on all of the progress that has been made across society in every era of humanity, it is leadership that has moved us forward. And in today's world, in the new ways of work, if you will, leadership has many more different variables, right? The availability of information, of transparency, the imperative of transparency from stakeholders puts additional pressure and responsibility on the big shoulders of leadership. And that is desperately needed today.
As someone that was really in the trenches in building businesses and inspiring people at AT&T and dealing with regulators, I mean, it's AT&T, it's a telecom company. I mean, did you see the leadership from government that was needed to get things done?
Well, here's what I would say, Brian. I would say that, depending on whatever industry you're in, and yes, I spent a big part of my corporate career in a regulated industry, you have a set of stakeholders. And that stakeholders, of course, include your customers, and includes your investors and shareholders. And in our case, and if you're in a regulated industry, it includes regulators as well. I do think that there are opportunities to improve public-private partnership. During my time at AT&T, and as with AT&T today, even though I haven't been there for years, I am still a shareholder, of course. A public-private partnership is an example of FirstNet that serves the first responders to the good of the country in order to utilize connectivity to save lives. More public-private partnership, I think, is the way to go. There are ways where the private sector can collaborate with the public sector, and I do think that government has a role in the advancement of society, in ensuring that infrastructure in this country, in each country, is invested in, because that is what enables society. That's what enables the economy. That's what enables consumers and businesses alike.
I follow your work, and you've made it clear that you're not retired, and I want to get into that topic too, but you're still, I mean, you're on some really cool boards of companies that really are, powering the world, the industrial economy. It's 3M, CSX. I mean, obviously not speaking in a board member capacity, but just like when you go into these board meetings, are executives inspired by the two folks that are trying to win the presidency? Are these businesses, these leaders thinking, wow, I mean, we really have an opportunity here to get through good things that are going to benefit our businesses no matter who wins?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's what I would say. And yes, I am privileged to have the opportunity to serve on 3 public company boards. You've neglected to mention Freck and Covey, of course, a small cap company as well. But when I think about my time, in those leadership discussions, the discussion is really around the purpose of the company, the values of the company, the opportunity. And yes, there is incredible excitement about the role that each of us play in in society, whether it's around material science innovation and getting back to those roots that, quite frankly, are critical, to advance the United States and advance the world. When we think about industrial innovation and the critical role of transportation and logistics and infrastructure, again, critical infrastructure. I work for a company that was responsible for essential services, right? We were essential services in this country. And so that is really more of the conversation, and the excitement really has to do with the market opportunity, with serving clients, with improving customer excellence and operational excellence, and yes, of course, generating long-term value for shareholders. The discussion of politics is one that, politics by definition, I think, are, they're based on divisiveness. And leadership, again, has no politics. You can be a leader and choose to be a leader in any party with any characteristic, with any set of attributes, as long as your motivation and your morals are there, right? And our focus is really, as leaders at that level, at the C level and in the boardroom, about the mission at hand, about the purpose at hand.
I did not mean to leave out small cap. Shout out to the Russell 2000 Index, of course. You can find that on Yahoo Finance, so that is the thing. But no, I actually, 3M, I remember covering, I got to know Mike Roman, who the former CEO of 3M, yes. And CSX, Joe over there, over at the time is Ford. So it's like, these are leaders that I've covered. So I wasn't trying to leave out that small cap company, but you mentioned divisiveness and culture. When the world seems more divisive than ever, is it hard to protect a company's values?
Yeah, I don't know that it's harder. I think it's more complex. So I think it depends on how you view complexity and the different variables. As it relates to divisiveness, technology has enabled so many incredible things, but it has also enabled access to misinformation and disinformation in a way that we have never seen before. So I do think that leadership today, in today's world, has to work much more diligently around ensuring that your values are what are driving your culture. Your values are the foundation of what your culture is. And you mentioned culture, Brian. Culture is, in my opinion, your only and ultimate sustainable competitive advantage, because culture are the set of behavioral norms of all of your people. They're reflected in your systems, in your processes, in your decision making. Culture is all about what happens when the door is open and the door is closed. It's what happens when things are really good, but importantly, it's what happens when things are really bad. Culture can go one of 2 ways. It can be the grease in your gears that enables that flywheel, or it can be the sand that gums you up, right? And so I do think that you raise a very important point, which is leaders have to double down on their values and ensure that they're not just stated, but they're lived in every way possible.
I've been surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, just given how the world works and what's happening, that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, has become such a political hot potato. Why do you think that's been the case?
Yeah, Brian, this is a question that I've gotten quite a bit, especially throughout this year and as the year has progressed. So I actually, this may be a surprise to you and others who are tuning in, but I'm not actually a fan of the DEI acronym. I think it oversimplifies 3 incredibly important strategic imperatives that are relevant, quite frankly, to every leader who is looking to grow and be successful in their business, in their role, no matter the industry. I like to break the words apart. So what is diversity? Diversity simply is a reality. With every generation that comes, diversity becomes even more important, right? The world is becoming more diverse. And I don't mean simply as it relates to gender identity, or race. diversity is everything. It's diversity of thought, of perspective, of experience, of education. It's so many different things. It's infinite number of things. Equity is really about fairness. And every leader, every business has to decide what fair outcomes they're striving for. Is it equal access to healthcare for all of their employees? Is it, I'll use the industry that I came from, is it equal and fair access to broadband services across the country? Because that's such a vital part of living today and thriving today in America and all around the world. So fairness is really an outcome that leaders have to decide what fair outcomes are they seeking. Inclusion, which is actually the topic of a recent book that I wrote, Lead Bigger, The Transformative Power of Inclusion. Inclusion is an intended action. It's purposely opening your mind, widening your perspectives for greater performance and impact. And so I like to break it apart. I think that the misnomer, and one of the reasons why DEI, quote unquote, has become so politicized, is that it is misunderstood and misinterpreted to be solely issues of representation of gender and race at the cost of everything else, right? And being someone who has been told that they were a DEI hire throughout my career, I can tell you that meritocracy and excellence and intelligence and contribution and performance have always been part of the DEI conversation. I think it's a misnomer that they are two separate discussions. But I like to focus, Brian, as a leader, on inclusion, because that's where the action comes in. That's what you have to choose to do to be a leader in the modern world.
And hang with us. We're going to go off for a quick short break. We'll be back on Opening Bid from the big, beautiful NASDAQ market site in Times Square. All right, having a great chat with Anne Chow, former AT&T business CEO, about leadership in America, leadership inside companies. And Anne, before we went off to break, you mentioned something that maybe a lot of viewers and listeners to the podcast are not normally, they know something they normally hear. You were viewed as a DEI candidate or told that. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, so Asia's kind of the funny thing, Brian. I've been one. I'm a proud second generation American. So my parents were immigrants to the United States. They came here in the 1960s from their native country of Taiwan because they knew that this country had an immense amount to offer, that this is where the land of hope was, and that where you came from did not dictate where you could go to and what you could become. So I'm very proud to be American. When I've been called a DEI hire throughout the course of my career, the irony of this is this: it's intended by some, when somebody makes that statement, to be an insult, right? Oh, you were only hired, you were only chosen because of your demographic profile, and very specifically your gender and or your race. In my case, it would happen to be both. For me, I tend to brush those kinds of things off. I know that I earned the positions that I performed in. And one of the ironies, I think, about people who may consider that comment an insult to the individual, it actually is an insult to the person making the decision, is it not? I mean, think about it, right? As a board decides to choose a CEO, as a CEO decides to hire their C-suite, as any leader chooses to hire somebody onto their team, what leader wants to choose somebody who can't do the job? Let me make that even more clear. What leader actually wants to choose someone who isn't the best candidate possible, right? We are all self-serving in a way in that we want the best talent around us. We want the best talent today. We want the best talent tomorrow. And so ultimately, when somebody says that to someone, they're actually insulting the person making the decision. Ironically, and throughout my career, those people tended to be many men, right? Which have been part of the dynamics of my career, is to have the opportunity to work with incredible leaders of different genders and different profiles.
And I think you would offer some really good perspective on this next one. Like, why are there still so many firsts in corporate America? I believe you were the first to hold your position inside of AT&T. We just lost two good leaders that left the company. Walgreens, Roz Brewer, she left Walgreens a couple of years ago. CVS is now former CEO Karen Lynch. Why are these firsts still happening? Like, what is it about culturally inside of some of these very old companies that may be preventing great diverse candidates from rising to the top and taking these companies into the next century?
Yeah, well, Brian, part of the reality of the human condition here is that we all have bias, right? And that was actually a book that I co-authored a couple of years ago, The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. But to be human is to have bias. That's actually how we start the book. And one of the, I think, most powerfully telling facts is that over 70% of leaders choose proteges of the same race and gender as themselves. Okay. And that is just part of the human dynamic of who we may be comfortable with, right? Think about when you bump into somebody who went to the same alma mater with you, right? It's like instant camaraderie, right? It's like instant, hey, you go to the front of line of being cool in my book, whatever the case may be. And so I think part of the challenge today in the corporate world is that, as you mentioned, culture, right? Culture is not only in your behaviors, culture is set in the norms and the systems and processes and policies of every company. So in order to move beyond your comfort zone, you have to lead much more inclusively. You have to be committed to widening your perspectives by engaging and including as many different kind of people as possible. And you happen to utilize women as the example of why are there so many firsts, right? Whether it's in the corporate boardroom, in the C-suite, or whatever. Why is it that women make up the majority of college graduates, yet are not even half of the C-suite yet, right? And I think it's work that we all have to do. We all have to figure out, no pun intended, to lead bigger and put ourselves and encourage the expansion of your aperture of what do different perspectives look like? What do they sound like? One thing I know for sure, Brian, is that if you don't choose to lead inclusively, if you don't choose to embrace the diversity of talent out there, you're just harming yourselves. You're actually limiting yourself as it relates to how you think about your workforce, how you think about your future markets, and how you think about even future investors, because the world is changing.
Is there a three-step plan, for any CEO that is watching Opening Bid, and I know a lot of them do because I get emails from them on the regular, which is a good thing to have. It's a high-class problem to have. How do they go about building more inclusiveness into their business?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to really, first of all, and this is a play that I ran in every leadership position that I had once I realized that I was a leader and I had responsibility beyond myself to do the job, but responsibility for the teams therefore the people that were in my purview. It's really about making sure that you're intentionally broadening your connections. The fact that you work beyond your immediate purview of your group, that you think much more comprehensively about functional inclusion, that you ensure that you kind of, I used to do this, put profile pics all next to each other, right, of my existing team, so that sometimes you have to be shocked into, well, is there too much commonality as I look at the profiles of the team that I have? What is it? What kind of skill sets do I need? What kind of background do I need to really diversify this? I also think that one of the things that great leaders do is they're very, very conscious about, they're very self-aware about their own weaknesses. Sometimes, our egos stop us from wanting to hire people and bring people in that maybe smarter in a different way, bring different skill sets than we do. That's actually the key to harnessing the power of inclusion, is to surround yourself with as many different kind of people as possible, not only on your teams, but in your partner teams, as well as out there in the market. Don't just go visit your biggest customers, which is a play that all of us CEOs run. Go out there and visit a diversity of set of customers. Go visit customers and spend time with customers that perhaps chose not to buy your services, or maybe that you lost to a competitor. Just really work to widen your perspectives and focus on the performance of your stakeholders. I think one of the key things, Brian, is that you've got to be very, very clear about your stakeholders and what they view as strong performance, whether it's your employees, your customers, your shareholders, or otherwise.
Now, switching gears a little bit, I know you have some interesting views on retirement. You're not retired. You're actually working and doing some important things. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Brian, for this question. I love this question because, when I was, and I have been told that, right? I've been told, man, you're too young to retire. When I was considering leaving corporate America on a full-time basis, I actually looked up the word retirement, and the definition was leaving the workforce. I knew that that was not what I was going to do. I knew that after a 30 plus, year run, that I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to contribute in new and different ways. And I felt that I could do that in a series of different roles, not just working for one organization or in one industry. So I am in a phase that I like to call rewirement. I'm an electrical engineer by education, and so the idea of rewiring has to do with your mindset, has to do about how you think about showing up in the workforce. And I've been really, really blessed to have the opportunity to serve on some great company boards. I also teach at Kellogg Northwestern as a senior fellow and adjunct professor. And I, wrote a book, also spent time with incredible leaders and insightful people like you, to be out there and to try to make this world a better place, to help to help both continue to be a student and practitioner of leadership.
Well, I thank you for the kind words on being insightful. I did forget the small caps, and I made a note of that. I'm usually always on top of my game. So what is your advice to folks, that may have achieved everything they need to achieve in like one job? I mean, and retirement is not in there. How do they build a plan for the next 10 years of their life? I mean, these are overachievers in corporate America land. They're only known rising the ranks and a lot of good things. I mean, how do they rebuild or rewire the next 10 years of their life?
Yeah, it's such an important question because all of us have so much to offer. And when we look at the demographics of the workforce, this is actually an imperative, right? It is an imperative to ensure that people who can still contribute, who desire to contribute, can do so, right? And so we have to work against things like ageism in the workforce and otherwise. So my advice to people who are thinking about a new chapter, if you will, right? The next chapter in their lives and in their careers is to really think about your personal purpose and your personal values. And what is it in your day, both personally and professionally, that bring you joy? Not just happiness, but joy. Joy comes from inside of yourself. And you have earned, the ability to make choices. You've earned the ability to give back and contribute in ways that can be incredibly profound. And so I would tell people that the first step is really to do an incredible amount of self-reflection on what do you believe your personal purpose is, what are your values, and where does joy come from for you? And I would tell anyone out there who is thinking about rewirement, not retirement, because I don't know that I'll ever actually retire, that it is an incredible, incredible journey, and it is one that you can decide to lead for yourself, and you are the one who writes that next chapter of your life.
And real quickly before I let you go, who have you reached out to in the past for? Who is your mentor? Do you have one or two that you've relied on through the years?
Yeah, so my view of mentorship perhaps is a little bit unconventional, Brian. Maybe that's why you're asking me this question. I believe that mentors can be lifelong, but they can also be episodic. And so I'm not one that has had many lifelong mentors. There isn't really just one person. I think for each stage of my career, I've leaned on different people. I would say that I tend to lean on my set of friends, my set of close confidants who are also business leaders and business executives, no one person in particular. And so, I have an opportunity to be now a mentor for many, many people. And it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. It is also another way to give back, right, in rewirement.
Anne Chow, really enjoyed this conversation. Really hit on a lot of important topics. Anne Chow, former AT&T business CEO. Good to see you. Welcome to Opening Bid. Don't be a stranger. We'll stay in touch.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
All right, be sure, of course, to hit us with those 5 stars on Spotify for Opening Bid, those likes on YouTube. Just continue to show us that love. We greatly appreciate it. We feel it, and it makes us do even better work. That's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid.